I thought we were going to have to play Marco Polo twice. I thought that after we played it the first time, that then I was going to have to make them stand still so that I could find one of them. Oh, but Liam, smart like Jesus, he is, figured it out. God doesn't trick us. God stands still. And then whenever we're able to find ourselves in God, we can't help but follow. As we prepare for the word preached, would you pray with me, please? Oh God, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of each of our hearts be found acceptable in your sight. For you are our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. When Martin Luther nailed his 95 Theses to the door of the Wittenberg Church, he did not mean to start a new religious movement. Yes, Protestantism sprang up from that event, but it was not Martin Luther's intent. No, this was a moment of kingdom inbreaking, when God's greater justice and mercy overflowed the bounds that the world placed on it. Martin Luther was most concerned about the poor. He called into question the tyranny of the Mother Church and the travesty the church had made of grace by selling indulgences. Indulgences were a fee you paid to buy grace. Grace, the unmerited favor of God. Grace, which is free. Grace, which is free, had been issued a price tag. Think your dearly departed one had slipped into purgatory? Ante up and you can spring them. That's how it worked. But Martin Luther had the guts to call out the church on this racket they had created and ask why the kingdom of the Pope was being built on the broken backs of the poor. It must have taken a lot of guts to do that. There's huge risk in naming the powers and the principalities of this world. It must have taken a lot of guts. Or in terms of our text for today, it must have taken a lot of heart. Take heart. That's what those around say to Bartimaeus when Jesus calls him. Take heart, he's calling you. Last week, I went with Chloe's preschool class on their first field trip. It was Chloe's first field trip ever. We rode the city bus to the fire station. That's a big day in the life of a 4-year-old. Get on that big bus, make your way through, find your seat, go to the fire station, walk through the fire station, sit down, and watch that big guy put on his boots and his jacket and all of his gear and his hat, and he looks even bigger, right? Then watch him put on his respirator and his face mask, and now that big guy looks like a monster or an alien. And that was about the time that Chloe crawled onto my lap. It was all too new. It was all too scary. And she just couldn't hack it alone. She needed to be near me. And then the alarm went off. 4-year-old pandemonium broke out. We've got to go, said the firemen. And then out came 4 other firemen and 1 firewoman. And they got onto their gear and they hopped into the truck, and all the kids stood up. And the teachers and the parents kind of circled the wagons, and we tried to get the kids to sit down, everybody just sit back down. And nearly every kid was covering their ears, and some of the kids started to cry, and off went the fire truck, and whoa! This big day day in the life of these 4-year-olds just got even bigger. Afterwards, Chloe's teachers talked to the class. That was really scary, wasn't it? There were new things to see and new experience to have, and we weren't expecting the fire truck to have to go. But you all did so well, the teacher said. And then the thing that they said next, that's what opened up the word to me in a new way for today. What they said next, it broke it wide open. They didn't say, "But you were all so brave." Nope, they didn't say that. They said, "You felt your fear and you acted anyway." Feel your fear and act anyway. That's what it means to take heart. Oh, sometimes we think we have to be so brave and fool ourselves into thinking that being brave means to not be afraid. We think we have to soothe over all of the rough places. We have to tidy up the mess before moving on to the next thing. We have to alleviate all of the chaos before we can move. We have to reduce all the anxiety before we can act. Is that what Martin Luther did? Hardly not. I bet he was shaking in his boots when he nailed the 95 Theses to the church door. And how about Bartimaeus? How long had it been since he had seen the world? Had he ever been able to see? How frightening. How frightening it must have been for Bartimaeus to get up. Pay attention to the text now. Bartimaeus regains his sight after he gets up and moves towards Jesus. When he gets up and goes to Jesus, he is still blind as a bat. Can you imagine how terrifying that must have been? To move after having sat as a beggar for so long. To walk away from your place in society as a beggar. To move out into the world without being able to see where you are going. Can you imagine how terrifying that must have been? And the disciples say, "Take heart. Feel your fear. Act anyway." Bartimaeus isn't stumbling around aimlessly. No, he may not have seen where he was going, but he knew where he was going. He was going to Jesus. Life is not some big game of Marco Polo. When we are blinded, God does not dash around trying to elude us. When we are blind, God stands still so that we can locate ourselves in the presence of the living one. Let me say that again. When we are blind, as we are all apt to be, God stands still so that we can locate ourselves in the living one. God stands still. It's our job to take heart, feel our fear, and act anyway. And when we take heart, we spring up. There is nothing timid about Bartimaeus getting up and going to Jesus. He flings off his cloak, his only worldly possession. That's how vibrant, that's how vital, that's how full of life he becomes when he's able to locate himself in the voice of the one calling to him. He gives up everything he has and goes unencumbered, vulnerable, and vibrant and vital. Bartimaeus took a risk when he took heart. Laying aside his cloak, he exposed his very soul to the world. He could no longer hide behind it. He could no longer be shielded by his beggar's stance. And when Martin Luther felt the power of God break into his heart and alleviate him of his blindness he had held to the injustices brought by the church, he did the same thing. No longer willing to live cloaked by the tyranny of the church, Martin Luther nailed his 95 Theses to the door, flinging off the cloak of complicity once and for all. When we are willing to locate ourselves in God, take heart, feel our fear, and act anyway, we can't help but spring up. We can't help but rise, rise, rise. And when we rise, our blinders fall by the wayside because we see the world for what it is. We see the stark reality of God in our midst, and we can't help but follow. The living one stands still so we can find ourselves. And once we do that, we must follow. We must. There is no going back. The beggar's cloak is on the ground. The protest letter is nailed to the door. We are exposed, and more importantly, the power of God in us is exposed too. It's not about you, remember? The power of God is springing up, welling up, brimming over in us, out of us, through us, and it is propelling us forward. But before we can follow, we have to be willing to get up. So here, this morning, we sit like Bartimaeus on the road. Close your eyes for a moment, would you? Close your eyes and imagine yourself as the blind man. It's not hard to do. We all turn a blind eye to all sorts of things in this world, don't we? What have you been blind to in your life? See it. What have you been blind to in your habits or in your relationships? See it. What have you been blind to in your places of work and school and worship? See it. What have you been blind to in the world, in our country, in our community? See it. Have you heard? Have you heard of the power of the living one? The one who makes all things new? Have you heard? Have you heard of the power of the one who brings release to the captives and a home to those in exile? Have you heard? Have you heard of the power of the one who binds up the brokenhearted and brings healing to the wounded? Have you heard? Have you heard of the power of the one who makes the lame to walk and the blind ones to see? That one is walking this way right now. Listen for the voice calling to you. Get up. Get up and go. Even in your fear, get up and go. Even in your doubt, get up and go. Even in your chaos, get up and go. Even in your pain, get up and go. Even in your grief, get up and go. Even in your anger, get up and go. Even in your anxiety, get up and go. Even in your questions, get up and go. Even in your excuses, get up and go. Even in your not knowing, get up and go. Even in your mess, get up and go. Even in your need to fix it, get up and go. Even in your propensity to ignore it, get up and go. Even in your habit to overthink it, get up and go. Even in your habit to downplay it, get up and go. Even in your present blindness, people of God, get up and go. Even in your fear, feel your fear, because it ain't going nowhere anyway. So feel it. Take heart. Get up and go. God has granted you new sight. Get up and go. Take heart and follow. Amen.